Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe. The global network of mayors at C40 Cities has hosted a conference to unpack the latest research which looks at the urgency and future of green jobs as well as opportunities for South Africa. The cities include Paris, Athens, Tokyo, Sydney, Lagos, Abidjan, Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg, amongst others. According to the research from the C40 Cities, urban climate action could create and support over 1.8 million green jobs in South Africa by 2030. The jobs would be part of a green and just recovery from COVID-19. Alongside the research, National Polling Commission by the C40 found that 2/3 of South Africans strongly support using national government funds to invest in green jobs in cities. The report identified improving the energy efficiency of existing and new homes, schools and workplaces as having the most significant job creation opportunity. Well, joining us now via Zoom from London, we're now joined by Dr. Rachel Huxley, who's Director of Knowledge and Learning at C40 Cities. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the programme.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I suppose we'll be talking about greening cities. There's a lot of development in different parts of the world happening at different rates. What have we learned perhaps from the cities that are far down the line that we could learn here in South Africa and in the developing world in terms of developing greener cities, but in a way that works because of where we're starting from?
Great question, and it's one of the reasons why C40 was sort of set up to share those learnings between cities. And I think it can go all sorts of directions. So there's lots that cities can learn from each other. And I don't think it's just about kind of more advanced cities learning from less advanced cities. But there's just a range of amazing examples out there. So we're seeing some incredible things happening in, for example, Copenhagen around the cycling that they've been able to undertake there. Almost sort of 50% of people using bikes around the city. So there's so much that everyone around the world can learn from them. And for example, in New York, they're doing incredible work around energy efficiency of buildings. And as you just referenced, that the research that we've just been doing to show how a green and just recovery in South Africa could really benefit cities and people by generating jobs. Retrofitting buildings is one of the best ways of generating good local jobs. So, cities can look to places like New York, who have some of the most ambitious retrofit laws and action out there, and learn from them. So absolutely, as you say, that's one of the best things that we do in the network, is have cities learning from each other and sharing.
So let's talk about Johannesburg a little bit. I mean, if you're in a plane looking down, all you see is trees and green. So some might say we're a green city already. We've got lots of plant life and so on and so forth. What is it that we're lacking that we need to work on urgently, do you think?
Well, so I would say Johannesburg probably isn't too different from most of our cities. So there's key areas that all cities need to be thinking about. And that's really around buildings and energy. So how efficient are our buildings, our homes and our offices? How can we make our existing buildings more efficient? And how can we ensure that any new buildings we build are efficient? And that's really important for climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. But it's also massively important for ensuring that the places we live and work are healthy. And as we've sort of said, you mentioned at the start, I mentioned earlier, it's a really great way of generating jobs. So Johannesburg, I would say, needs to think about buildings and energy. You mentioned sort of looking down from a plane, hopefully not too much flying from climate change perspective. But if the city cities that are sort of spread out and have a huge amount of, therefore, transport going on need to think about their transport initiatives. And particularly what we've seen in the pandemic is that public transport has been really hit. And so one of the things that we've been pushing for is really supporting and promoting public transport as well as active forms of transport, because a huge amount of emissions come from the transportation sector in cities. And that has a massive impact on air pollution and on health and on road deaths. So there's a huge amount of benefit to be gained by focusing on transport. And lastly, I'd say that Johannesburg should look like all of our cities at waste. And making sure that we're really thinking about a circular economy, recycling and reusing as much as possible, and reducing waste. And if you're looking down and Johannesburg is looking like a nice green city, then let's try and keep it that way, because nature-based solutions are absolutely fantastic from a perspective of not only just nice quality neighbourhoods, but preventing, reducing exposure to extreme heat, which is one of the sort of deadliest impacts of climate change, and also reducing flooding. So I would say the greenness, the literal greenness, is a good thing to keep hold of.
So let's talk a little bit about green jobs. What are these green jobs? What do they look like?
Well, so they look like, as we talked about, one of the best sources of green jobs is improving our homes. So they look like insulating your homes, they look like improving the windows, they look like changing the appliances and upgrading the appliances in our homes. And they might look like, they're very similar in many ways to a lot of the jobs that are already happening, but we just need to slightly sort of kind of adjust the skills and the materials that we're using. So, for example, when we're building new houses, we want to use materials that have less embodied carbon. So the jobs that we're talking about are quite similar to the jobs of today. We just need to adapt to make sure that we're incorporating a kind of low carbon and sustainable approach to those. So they're things like construction jobs, they're things like transport jobs, they're jobs in the energy sector, but we're just talking about solar PV, solar photovoltaic power and wind power instead of coal or gas. And the analysis that you referred to earlier that we did shows that by investing in climate safe action and climate positive action, we'll generate more jobs than a high carbon alternative. So really similar sorts of jobs, but more of them is what I would say.
All right. But it sounds as if these jobs need a higher level of skilling maybe. And so that could be a challenge as well for us in terms of getting people up to the level of these new types of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great point. We really need to invest in a just transition. So there's a couple of things to think about there. And your point about skills and making sure people have the right skills is absolutely pivotal. And so we can do that by working with cities. And cities have a lot of programs already. So places like Cape Town that are doing pilots to improve housing and are upskilling thousands of workers in the process to provide them with the right kind of skills to be able to undertake those high energy efficiency retrofits. And other cities like Los Angeles are doing exactly the same thing, upskilling and training people on installing solar panels on residential homes. So we definitely need those training programs. The other thing that when we looked at in this analysis around green jobs and the jobs potential of climate action was who gets those jobs and how do we make sure that the transition to a low carbon future is equitable. So it's really important that the right kind of policies and training programs are in place to make sure that those jobs are open to everyone and to make sure that the disadvantaged members of the community can access those jobs so that they have the skills and training they need to be able to access them.
All right, talking about policies, there's a concept that we've been mentioning in passing as we were discussing, just transition, just recovery. Help our viewers understand what you mean when you say a just transition, a just recovery.
Yeah, thank you. So What we mean is a recovery that supports everyone and doesn't leave anyone behind. So when we look at climate action, there are a range of excellent benefits that come from that. So we see health benefits, we see jobs benefits coming from that climate action. And what we mean by a just transition or a just recovery is that we make sure that those benefits are available to all. So if climate action is being taken, for example, to improve transport to reduce air pollution, that those measures are taken all over a city and not just in certain parts of a city, or that they're taken in the areas of the city where there's most pollution at the moment and there's most vulnerable population. So that's the sort of thing that we mean. And if you're doing a program to retrofit and upgrade houses, that you make sure you're thinking about where the most vulnerable communities are that could benefit the most from that. So that's the kind of thing we mean by a just transition.
All right, so perhaps as we start to wrap up, I mean, I look at across Africa and we're at different stages of development. But one of the things that is common to all of our major cities is that they were built 60s, 70s, and they were built for much smaller populations. Populations exploded, but the cities didn't. And what's happened is that the city's infrastructure has been challenged quite a bit. We're almost seeing, and somebody once described it as the ruralification of the urban areas, where a lot of things and elements have started to bring down. So as we're starting to think about greening, we're dealing with so much in terms of just dealing with poverty and destruction of infrastructure. How do we balance all of this?
A really great point again. And I think we don't need to think of this as a kind of zero-sum game in terms of its climate action or its maintaining our infrastructure. Really, the trick here is to make sure that when we upgrade infrastructure, we do so in a way that's sustainable. And that might seem a sort of difficult task, but it's imperative, because if we don't do that, we're creating infrastructure that won't be able to withstand the climate impacts that are being experienced now, and we're going to increasingly experience. So, for example, just making sure that infrastructure is flood resistant is really important. And that's a climate action, and that has all of the kind of benefits that I talked about before, but it also, as you say, kind of helps keep a city running. So it is about making sure that urban areas and cities function, but doing so in a way that's sustainable and that provides a kind of quality of life for everyone living in the city. It's definitely a huge challenge, and we really need to work with cities to understand how they can undertake those kind of actions quickly and how they can finance them, so where the resources can come for taking that kind of action.
Dr. Rachel Huxley, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Really enjoyed chatting to you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Great. That's Dr. Rachel Huxley, who's the Director of Knowledge and Learning at C40 Cities, having important conversations about how we move into the future, which is happening now, in a green way, especially given the challenges that we're already facing, and that we need to embrace these new ways. And there are a lot of jobs, lots of potential with greener cities and greener economies.